Yeah, sure, people get killed, you know, but I'm very careful, so I'm not going to be the one that hurts anybody, no less kills anybody. Of course not, you know, it can't happen to me.
I talked to my dad again. I was like, what's going on? And he said, well, there's been an accident and your sister didn't make it.
I could never recreate that moment. Whatever that was that came out from the depths of my soul, that scream, that horror, that was, you know, my worst nightmare coming true.
It's always the other guy. Never is this something that happens to us or our family.
It won't happen to us. We're good people. We follow the rules. You know, we're always out there trying to help other people, or, you know, and then there you are, the bad guys.
I wanted to know who he was and why he felt like he could get away with it, and that he was different, and, you know, he could make it home from the beach intoxicated and drive and take the life of my sister.
If I could turn back the clock before May 11th, that crash never would have happened, and I would still have my daughter.
My name is Eric Smallridge, or I guess I should say it was. I'm now inmate P22679. On May 11, 2002, I made the worst decision of my life. I chose to drink and drive.
Megan was born on March 31st, 1982. She is an identical twin. She and her sister Carmen were born, and because they were twins, they were just into everything, and what one didn't think of, the other did.
She was just a lot of fun, a very magnetic type personality, and made friends very easily. I enjoyed very much spending time with her. She was my heart and soul, my best friend, somebody that thought I could never live without.
Eric was a very special son in that while I have two other sons, he was our natural born, and he always made me very proud. He was a tremendous athlete, and since he was a little guy, he would get out there in a soccer field and kick the ball around. And as he grew up, he was involved in the scouting program and ultimately became an Eagle Scout. And I don't have to tell you that that makes a dad very proud.
Megan and Carmen were always my best friends, even from, you know, way back in middle school and high school. I just saw us, you know, being very close forever, and having babies together, a big family, just like ours.
Eric was really on his way to fulfilling his dream of, he wanted to be a successful businessman, and he had high aspirations of going on and having a really productive life. I had a girlfriend, and they were contemplating the future, and so I had a lot of hope and excitement about where my baby was going to go from there. It was a good time for him.
We always thought that, you know, maybe one day if it worked out, we would get married at the same time, have a double wedding, you know, share experiences like that, have children at the same time so that they could grow up together and kind of have a life that was maybe mimicked of ours and be best friends like we were.
Everything seemed to be going wonderfully. I guess I was oblivious to some of the catastrophic things that happened. I think like every other parent, we hope for the best and believe that that will come true, except that unfortunately in Eric's case it came tragically to an end on May 11th of 2002 when he had a very serious accident.
I had been under the influence so many times, and I had tempted fate so many times, and nothing ever happened. it was nothing but selfishness. I said, oh, well, if I get a DUI, then I'll start to think about it. Or if I get pulled over, or God forbid I wreck my car, then I'll really have to tell my parents will wonder what's going on. It was about me, I. What happens if I do this, or if I get a ticket? So I still had that same attitude. Well, I'll give it another try, and if I get pulled over, then we'll have to think a little more seriously about it.
It was the day before Mother's Day, and I had talked to Megan Friday night, the night before at about 11:30. I called her to see what she was doing. She told me that she and Lisa were at the beach and they were looking at the sky, and it was so beautiful. And we talked for a few minutes, and I really basically called to ask her if she wanted to go with me to Tallahassee, because I thought it would be nice to have 2 of my 4 children with me on Mother's Day. And she said yes, just call me in the morning. So that was our arrangement, and we said, I love you, and we hung up, and that was our last conversation.
Well, it all started early in the morning. I swing by the store and I grab a 12-pack. And we head to the beach. There's about 10 of us down there. And we're throwing the Frisbee and just getting some sun and hanging out, just, kind of what college guys do. So we stopped at a little bar down there. We ate, and of course we ordered some pitchers of beer, and we had a couple more drinks, but it wasn't like a night of all-out partying by any means, But next thing you know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and the bars are about to close, and it's time to go. So got on the road. I didn't see him, and neither did anybody else. But apparently, the car that Megan and Lisa were driving in, Megan Napier and Lisa Dixon, had come on into the inside lane, and I'm in the middle lane, and there was a white Camaro in the right lane. And as we take off from the light, we're going around a curve, and it says right lane ends. And he pulls up next to me, and I look over at him, and in that instance, he's merging, and I'm looking at him, and next thing you know, I leave my lane.
He hit them at such an impact that it smashed in the back end and exposed the wheel, and his tire caught her tire, and that caused him to flip. And then that caused them to slide sideways into the tree. So the impact was where Megan was, on that side, on the passenger side. I believe that their necks were broken when he hit them from behind. The seat backs actually broke, so they ended up being kind of shoved into the back seat. It was a reclining position that they were in because of the seat backs breaking. But I believe their necks broke at that instant, and then, just whipping around the tree just kind of finished them off.
It was devastating to me to hear my son tell me that he had an accident. We talked about what happened. That conversation abruptly ended because the police took his cell phone away from him as I listened. It was at that juncture that the police explained to him, and I could overhear this, that 2 people, I didn't know what gender, had died in the accident.
The crash happened at about a little after 2 in the morning, and I found out about it probably around 8:45. My sister-in-law showed up at the door, and she was very somber, and she just looked at me and said, "There's been an accident. It was Megan. She didn't make it."
When I heard that there had been an accident, I immediately thought, like my grandparents had died, or somebody's house caught on fire. And when he said my sister, he probably said Megan, just to make sure that I knew it was Megan. I just lost it. It was just the most surreal and awful thing that I could ever even imagine. It just never even crossed my mind.
She was definitely, for lack of a better adjective, ripped away from me very, very quickly. And definitely, I feel like half of me is gone, if not more.
The very first time I saw the car that the girls were in was at the impound. It's a little gold Mazda. I don't know what model it is, but It was small, and when I first walked up to it, it took my breath away, because even though I knew it was going to be bad, you're just never prepared for what it's going to look like.
The side of the vehicle that had the most damage happened to be where my sister was sitting. And so all I could think about was her inside of it, wrapped around a tree, you know, not being able to move. And just thoughts of what was going through her head before it happened. You know, I wanted to know all that, and I never will.
We did receive the autopsy report of Megan and what went on in her body, and she was just smashed. I mean, her spleen was smashed, her heart was severed in 3 places, and she was just crushed. And that made it make sense, you know, that nobody could have survived that accident. Because you always wonder, you know, well, could they have lived? Could they have lived? But there's just no way.
We were in total shock, having learned what transpired. When we reached Eric, of course, I can only say a lot of tears, just an awful lot of tears. It was hard to believe that 2 beautiful young ladies had died. He was devastated, absolutely devastated. The sorrow that we felt is beyond description.
The realization set in when we got to the apartment where Eric lived, and he took one look at me and I him, and we just both fell apart. I was at that point so relieved to see him, and it was heartbreaking, because his heart was broken at that point, realizing what he had done. He was inconsolable.
And so we realized that we best just pack him up and take him back to Tallahassee, which we did. At that point, it became apparent that Eric was becoming extremely despondent, and I was deeply concerned.
I went into the darkest pit that I've ever been in, ever. It was like the deepest depression I've ever been in my life. I was so ashamed of myself that I didn't even want to be seen in anybody else's eyes. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the time I was contemplating suicide, because I knew that, you know, 2 20-year-old girls had just been killed. Granted, I didn't mean to do it, but it was such a selfish act on my part that why should I go on living? Why do I deserve to keep on living and they don't?
He got the phone and called us to say goodbye. That's not something any parent ever wants to go through.
I kept telling her repeatedly, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't do it, I can't do it. You know, she's like, we'll help you through it. I said, it's not gonna work. I can't handle it. I can't live with what I've done. So I have to go. I kept telling her, I have to go. And just this little spirit inside of me told me, look, man, it's gonna be all right. You're gonna make it through this. What would your mom think if she had to bury you with a big hole in the back of your head because you couldn't stand up to what, and take responsibility for what you've done?
I kept talking to him, and his dad put down the phone and used another line to call the police.
And 2 Grady County deputies responded to the scene, and I'm certain in my own mind that if they hadn't done that and joined us in convincing him not to shoot himself, that he would have done it. We realized that we would have to prepare for his defense.
It was about, I think, 4 days of trial, maybe 5. It was extremely difficult. And to sit there and watch your baby, your child, sitting at the table in front of you, he was ill. He was so ill with hurting and fear at that point. of what would become of him. It was very difficult.
And people have to recognize that this is very expensive. You don't hear about this when you read about Mel Gibson when he's picked up in California. You don't hear about this when Paris Hilton is picked up. The difference being, of course, that there were no deaths involved. But why not? It could have been them. They could have driven into two beautiful 20-year-old young ladies, and that's exactly what they'd face. Would they be released? How many thousands of dollars would be involved? In our case, we had to muster $50,000. People don't recognize the gravity of these type things, the cost involved. The defense of this case is $150,000 at a minimum. Now, many times we thought this would be painful, not only on us, but most particularly the families of Megan and Lisa.
It was very difficult for us through the trial because we saw him fighting for his freedom. I mean, in a way you understand that because nobody wants to go to prison for 30 years. But we wanted to see that remorse.
I hated him. I didn't ever want to see him. Had no desire to meet him, had no desire to know him.
I was just mad, and I wanted him to die. I thought, you know, the only way to make sense of this is for him to die too, because he did something so stupid that he deserves it.
When we realized that there was, you know, the potential of 30 years in prison, of course my reaction was, you know, this can't be. He didn't mean to hurt anybody. He's such a sensitive person in so many ways.
And I wanted so bad to be innocent, even though I knew I was guilty, deep down. I wanted so bad for somebody to tell me I was innocent because I thought that would be what would help me. But the fact is the only thing that helped me was actually accepting responsibility for what I had done.
The verdict came down guilty. I think we were prepared for that. But when the judge pronounced 22 years, immediately your head starts doing the numbers. You know, how old will he be? You know, okay, he'll be in his 50s. Oh my gosh, I'm in my 50s.
Being 60 years old at that time, I knew that I'd be 80 before he was released. And that's a long time. And I wasn't really planning on living to be 80.
22 years, which was just a year and a half, basically longer than he had lived. He would now be in prison for another lifetime.
They read the guilty verdict, I knew I was guilty, and that's the point where I started to accept responsibility. So when they read 22 years, honestly, that wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about the time that they took from me and put me in prison because I had brought all this upon myself. It was about me being able to apologize to these families.
He wrote us a letter, and that letter, I'll never forget. I read that letter probably 10 times and sobbed the first 10 times I read it because he apologized. And you could tell that he was very remorseful from the depths of his soul.
It's easier to forgive a person when you know they're sitting in a jail cell and they are sitting there with child molesters and rapists and thinking, man, he made a dumb mistake. He shouldn't be sitting there with intentional criminals.
But what really hurts and what the real punishment is having to deal with the fact that 2 lives, in my case, were taken because of a selfish decision I made. That's the real punishment, is living with that. And so when they read the 22 years, I said, well, that's just what I'm gonna have to do because that's my debt to society. And I knew that no prison time would ever bring Megan and Lisa back, and it's never gonna make it completely better for the families.
If Eric is able to speak to youth, either through, you know, the prison cell where he is or outside of it, I feel like he can make a huge difference because he has been on that side of the steering wheel and he has survived it, which he is lucky that he did. You know, Megan and Lisa weren't that lucky.
If there was one thing that I could ask for in this world, I would ask for them to be back. I would ask for this situation not to have happened. And that's why I intend to do whatever I can to carry on their legacy in a positive manner, instead of to continue to let this be a tragedy. Make something beautiful come of it and try to deter as many people from making the same mistake that I did in honor of them. And I would want them to know that that's what I plan on doing. You are stripped of all your pride when you were put into a prison system. The first thing they do is strip you butt naked. They talk down on you, of course. You know, they're trying to get you ready for prison system. You know, you're under so many rules that your pride is literally stripped. We have a set schedule, and I hear people, and have actually myself referred to it as Groundhog's Day. Your routine: morning wake-up call, 4:45. Breakfast at 5 to 5:30. You have the same menu, and the food never changes. They call the work squads at 7 o'clock. Then you go to lunch at 11 o'clock. Then you go back to work at 12 o'clock. And it's such a repetitive routine. Everything you do is under scrutiny. If you want to make a phone call, you have to wait to a certain hour. And when you do call, it's the people on the other end, your family or friends, that have to pay for that call. But being put into a dorm with 70 people that you don't know is one of the hardest things there is, because there's bitterness, there's hatred. The anger just builds. And so you have to kind of walk on eggshells a lot. And, you know, especially when you first get here, it's a very scary place, you know, because you don't know when somebody's going to snap. There's a lot of different groups of people. A lot of the black guys hang out with black people, the Puerto Ricans with Puerto Ricans, the whites with the whites. So it's almost like a segregated place. It's like a really small, primitive community within a very huge community. Except for we're behind razor wire, and you're here with people of all ranges: child molesters, murderers, rapists. They're all here on this compound. People ranging from having a year and a day in prison to having multiple life sentences. And you have to be around these people no matter how you're feeling. So if you're sick, you're with the same 70 people. You know, it's hard for people in the free world to pick 1 or 2 roommates to live with. Well, how about here? Here's 70 that you didn't pick. And here's 6 toilets that y'all can use. And here's 6 shower heads that y'all can use. There's 2 heaters. There's 6 ceiling fans. And there's no AC. No air conditioning. So when it gets 110 degrees outside, you can believe that you're sweating. Have a nice day. It's horrible. I'm not saying that Florida is treating their inmates bad. I'm saying that the situation that you get yourself into is what's bad. Some very disturbing things go on after the lights go out in prison. You're supposed to go to bed, and the officers do the best they can to keep people in their beds. I guess the old saying is, you know, freaks come out at night, you know, and that's what it is here too. Fortunately, in the 3 years that I've been here, I've never been exposed to it, but I'm one of the few. So life here has been an experience, to say the least, and it's not a place that I would ever suggest anybody come to, and I would never want to be here again. The one thing that bothers me the most about being in prison is being away from my family and friends. That is the hardest thing there is, and that is my punishment, and there's nothing beyond that. One of the other hardest things that is right up there on that level is having to look out at these razor wires and remember every day why I'm here. And that's because of a decision I made. I chose to drink and drive, and this is what I get for it. And that is really hard. Every dorm has bars on the windows. And when you wake up in the morning and you see 70 roommates and you want to look out the window and there's bars, And outside of those bars are gun towers and razor wire all over the fence. It's a constant reminder of you're in prison for a reason. What is that reason? You chose to drink and drive.
Time has come that we must stop drinking and driving.
It has to be not socially acceptable for everybody, for anybody. We just can't, you know, the same old thing doesn't work anymore. We can't have a drink and leave a restaurant thinking, okay, you know, I'll just drive carefully, because people do it every day.
In Florida, we have a little over 3,000 traffic fatalities each year. One-third of those fatalities are alcohol related. Of all the traffic crashes, about 1 in 10 traffic crashes are alcohol related.
You may not even think you're that bad off, and other people may not think it either. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to drink and drive. You know, if you know that you've had more than 2 or 3 beers, you can't get behind the wheel because you don't know exactly where you're at. So that's why it's a lot more safe to just not drink and drive at all.
It's only after the fact, after the tragedy, that you start really examining issues and say, wow, I guess I thought it was typical what my boys were doing. I thought I was right on top of it.
One of the things that I encourage all parents to do is sit down and talk to your teen. I don't mean when they start driving, I mean when they're a teen. When they're 13, you need to be sitting down with them, explain to them and show them that you care.
Keep an eye on them, know what they're doing, know where they're going.
Know who their friends are.
Absolutely. Stay up for them when they're coming home at night, so you can make sure that they're in the condition you think they ought to be when they come home.
Don't hesitate to give them a hug and sniff them every now and then. Make sure they, you know, you don't smell any alcohol on them, or, you know, just check up on them.
Parents are role models, and I think that kids watch you, and they're going to imitate what you do.
You can't just tell them don't drink and drive and then, but we'll go out to dinner and have 3 or 4 beers and still drive home. You really have got to show them that you're living what you're telling them.
If they have made this mistake over and over again, give us a call, give the police department a call. We'll be glad to come to your house and provide some information for you. Sit down and talk with your young teen with you and give them some real life scenarios, what could and couldn't happen to them, and give you some good advice on how to avoid that peer pressure.
This isn't a game. It's not a game anymore, you know. We've been tempting fate for so long, and just because nothing's ever happened doesn't mean it won't. And so this can happen to anybody at any time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be completely your fault, because the legal system has said that if you were 1% at fault, then you're guilty. Not me. It's not going to happen to me. And so every time my parents would tell me about it, I would say, okay, Mom, okay, Dad, trust me, I'm not going to do it. And then I would go do it.
When I got to Eric after the accident, that first time I saw him after the accident and we both broke down, he kept saying, why didn't I listen? Why didn't I listen? He just kept repeating, why didn't I listen?
It's very important for people to know that they're not treating this lightly. It used to be a slap on the wrist. Even when someone would get killed, it would be, oh, well, it was an accident, and so we're not going to give you too much time, but you better not do it again. Well, they've changed their stance. Their stance now is, you got behind the wheel knowing that you were impaired, and therefore you knew what you were doing, and if you're going to do the crime, you're going to do the time. Because the truth of the matter is that if you are .07 and you get into an accident and somebody's killed, you may not get DUI manslaughter, but I can guarantee you, almost with 95% surety, that you will get a vehicular homicide charge. And you know what it carries? The same exact thing as DUI manslaughter. So buzzed or drunk, it's all the same.
Had Eric not gotten a DUI, it would have been like what I talked about earlier, you know? Maybe he did make it home. But what if he decided to do that the next weekend and took somebody else's life?
You have to have a plan before you even set out for the night, and you need to talk about it with your friends, and you need to talk about it with your family, and I think communicating is the key, and then holding each other responsible. I think everybody has this moral and civic obligation, because if people don't hold each other accountable for drinking and driving, that's how this stuff happens. You know, Eric had friends who told him, and other friends who could have, you know, physically intervened and said, no, I'm not letting you do this. But they didn't, you know, and you have to wonder, are you really being a friend if you're letting someone who you know should not be drinking and driving get it behind the wheel of a car?
People have got to know that they must designate drivers.
People frown upon designated driving because it's not cool. But they love superheroes. But really, superheroes and designated drivers do the same thing. They both save lives. And that's why it really is cool to be a designated driver. You know, because had I had a designated driver, Megan and Lisa might have still been here. Or had I been the designated driver, Megan and Lisa would still be here.
Because of that, I mean, my twin sister is no longer alive, and one of my best friends is no longer alive. And I feel like peer pressure had a lot to do with it, you know?
Peer pressure, I think, is the most significant thing that young people deal with. They're all bravado and hope and dreams, and they've got to be, what their peers think of them is so vitally important that sometimes it's strong enough that they'll do things even against their own character. On the other hand, it doesn't even have to be against their character. If it's against the law, they'll risk it.
It's so much more admirable for someone to stand up and say, maybe we should think about, you know, having a designated driver or take a cab tonight, than to just let it pass because you don't want to be that person, you know, that brings it up. So I would just encourage people to take a stand for what they know is the right thing to do.
How many people have a breathalyzer in their car? Breathalyzer can be purchased for as little as $17. Not many people have one. If a person is drunk, that person doesn't belong on the road. And if she contributes in the slightest towards an accident, they better be ready to spend 10 years, minimum, of their life in prison with the possibility per death of 15 years.
Just to save one family from all of this grief that we've experienced, and it's worth it. So it's just all about trying to get the message out there and trying to get people to be more responsible. And nobody's telling anybody not to drink and not to have a good time, but just to be smart about it.
Everyone has a cell phone these days. What's the number? The number is 911. And they'll be glad on the other end to respond.
If you're going to party, go for it. Plan ahead. Plan your exit strategy. Have a way to get yourself home safely without endangering anybody, and don't endanger your future. Even if you don't hurt anybody but yourself, you can ruin your life through DUI. Plan ahead. It's so easy to do, but we never think of it. We have to start doing that.
Somebody listening to this will die as a result of drunk driving. It's a terrible statistic, and it's got to stop.
My advice to anybody that thinks it can't happen to them is that's exactly what I thought. I thought that not in a million years would I be the one to take the life of two people. I didn't even think I would kill myself. You know, I didn't think that was a possibility. I thought that the worst that could happen to me was I would get a DUI, and then I'd have to worry about a hardship license and, you know, listen to my parents tell me, how many times did I tell you not to drink and drive, and look what you've done. And that is the most flawed and selfish way of thinking, and I can honestly say that that was me. I was the one that was saying that too, and look where I'm at. My name's not Eric Smallridge anymore, it's P22679, and to think that it can't happen to you is completely wrong.
We want folks to know we don't care how old you are, what your excuse is, what's going on in your life, how this is going to affect your career opportunities or whatever. We have a zero tolerance for drinking and driving. If we catch you drinking and driving, you are going to be arrested and you're going to be taken to jail. That will stay on your record for the rest of your life. We're asking you not to drink and drive, but if you choose to, don't ask us for a warning. You're going to be arrested and you're going to jail.